it, but the schools aren't really teaching that as part of America's history,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a very crucial part of America's
Mm-hmm.
history.
Mm-hmm. So after the Civil Rights Acts are passed,
Mm-hmm.
what was life like in Farmville, and how did you make your way to Prince William County?
My professional career brought me to Northern Virginia. I worked for the federal government from when I got out of college, and was stationed in the district. And cost of living forced me into the suburbs. So we settled in Prince William at 71, I think it was. So 5 years out of school, 71, 72. But the act in Farmville, I think there was a period, and really I think that period ran far too long, is that, well, we got the Civil Rights Act, now everything's fine. Closer to it was obvious it wasn't. There was still just overt segregation and acts of racism and so forth. There was hope, though. The act did create a tremendous amount of hope that things were going to get better. Of course, it was after Kennedy had been assassinated, but Johnson picked up the ball, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reasons. At least the act was passed. So there was this feeling of hope, and now we just need to do our own stand fast, if you will, and keep the pressure on.
Mm-hmm.
Those of my age group, I won't say we could see through the act, but we saw some holes and loopholes, and how people, and our strategy, if you will, our conversations were, watch how they get around this, and those kinds. So it was that, ever mindful that the problems may have been mitigated, but the problems were still there. And as today, I mean, I tell people often, it was easier, although it was more challenging physically because of the beatings and the killings and so forth, but it was much easier to get at racism in the 60s because it was so overt. The racism we fight today is a tough fight because it's 2 or 3 layers under various policies and decisions and motivations.
Mm-hmm.
So while we were hopeful with the act, many of us were still skeptical about and not knocking it. I mean, Lord, where would we be if we did not have the Civil Rights Act at all? But the recent challenges to the Voting Rights Act is what I'm talking about. It's we're doing it for the good of the country, but no, you're doing it because you want to be able to orchestrate and control outcomes of elections.
Mm-hmm.
Those kind of things.
Well, that brings up a good point. Why do you think Congressman Connolly's initiative to do this Civil Rights Archive project is so important?
It's extremely important, whether you're a history major or history buff or anything, is because motivations haven't changed, and a retelling of the story and an evaluation, an understanding of the history will make people then analyze current events and current issues more closely, examine what the decision making, and understand the basis for some of the decisions. Any history buff will tell you that you must know how you got to where you are, and you must understand your history. There are people that 50 miles from Farmville that are my age will tell you they never knew that was going on. So if you don't know your history, then you don't understand. Because I've had people come to the church and say, "You're from Prince Edward? Well, what happened in Prince Edward?" I was from Emporia. I said, "Well, that's 58 miles away." They didn't teach it, and no one retold it. And they would tell you, who needs to talk about that old stuff? Well, it's very important that the young kids, not to help generate any hatred in their part, it's to give them an understanding. And if you understand your history, then you can better analyze some of the decisions. Because the history will tell you what motivations were then, and you're allowed to compare, if you will, what may be motivating decision makers now. So I think I commend Congressman Connolly. Jerry has always just shown an interest in fairness and fair play and so forth, and in history, And he will tell you repeatedly that you have got to understand where this nation was, where it has been, and how this nation got to where it is in order to go forward. So it's very important.
Do you have any? Well, let's just back up a bit. You are still active because you're the president of the NAACP for Prince William
For
County.
Prince William County, yeah.
So let's talk about that. What do you think some of your greatest legacies have been working within the NAACP here locally?
I think when I took over and even joined the chapter, we recognized once again that we didn't have to address segregated lunch counters. We didn't have to address overt racism. What we had to do was educate the minority community, white, poorer whites who were dependent on aid and so forth. And we helped the Hispanic and African Americans. It had to get them educated as to what is available, if you will, or we would bring in like Sheriff Hill for the county and tell about the sheriff department so that your only exposure is not when he's serving